go through. There it is. And then finally, I'll let you know that we have a Q&A portion that we'll be doing at the end of the session. And my colleague Lissa Glasgow has retitled herself to have the name Questions Lead in the chat. So if you have any questions that you would like to submit for the Q&A, please submit them directly to Lissa as our questions lead in the chat, and we'll try to get to as many as we can. So with that, thank you once again for joining us. And to kick it off, I'll pass it over to my colleague, Sophia Sunderji.
Wonderful. Well, thank you so much, Ben, for kicking us off. And thank you, everyone, for being here. We're really just so grateful that you could join us. And so my name is Sophia Sunderji, and I sit on the research team at the GIIN. And it's really a treat to get to share just a couple weeks ago. And so today we'll plan to share a little bit of insight on the motivation for building this benchmark. And Ben, we can, I think, go ahead to the next slide. In addition to motivations, we'll do a demo so you can see what the benchmark actually looks and feels like, and sort of see some of those product features in action. And then we'll welcome onto the stage two of our guest speakers and GIIN friends, Ami Patel at Elevar Equity and Anna Kanze at Grassroots Capital Management. And both Ami and Anna were part of the benchmark design team, the group of investors that really helped build and shape the benchmark. So we'll get to hear some of their perspectives and insights on the process, and also how they might envision really using the benchmark in their own organizations moving forward. And then from there, we'll share just a little bit more detail on the design process itself of actually designing and developing the benchmark. And of course, some information on next steps for the effort and how you might get involved. As Ben mentioned, we'll save some time at the end for questions. And so please do continue to send any and all questions over to Lissa, who is labeled as questions lead. And we'll be sure to tackle those at the end. And so if we take a little bit of a step back and think about the big picture and what the GIIN is really working towards in the impact investing industry, we envision a world in which all investors integrate impact into investment decisions simply by default. And this is meaningful for a whole bunch of reasons. We all know that global inequality is growing, and we're seeing the urgencies that are manifesting really around all of us, and the massive inequities when it comes to race, to gender, to access to basic human rights. And I also think that all of us on this call also recognize that climate change is a crisis, and the consequences of not acting are catastrophic. And thirdly, I think we also all recognize that capital is powerful, and we can put capital to work to address some of those major social and environmental urgencies. And so the challenge for investors, from what we hear from so many of you on the line, is really about how to do that, how to integrate impact into investment decision-making in a way that is efficient and effective. And the reality is that there's very much a gap in the market infrastructure when it comes to impact, which presents a lot of sort of untapped opportunity for investors. And so if we go to the next slide, we'll see that the development of the benchmarking effort has really been shaped by a number of drivers that make this moment so opportune for this critical sort of analytic or market tool. We recognize just the strong need to mitigate impact washing, and we've seen tremendous growth in the impact investing industry over the past several years, especially with just a lot of new players coming in and claiming different types of impact. And the benchmark provides an opportunity for investors to really demonstrate that impact in a way that is credible and backed by data. And then along with that rapid growth, what we're seeing is really a need for investors and for funds to differentiate themselves on the basis of impact. And this is meaningful for asset owners who are really keen to allocate capital based on impact. And also, of course, for asset managers who want to differentiate themselves based on not just impact measurement and management process, but the actual impact results. And then thirdly, and finally, this is creating space for really an opportunity for investors to compare themselves to each other and to peers, but also to the social and environmental challenges and to the change that's actually needed to solve those challenges. And so that's where the impact performance benchmarking tools come into play. And they have really just the powerful potential to put comparable impact insights into your hands and allow you to take action based on impact performance. And so with that, we are so excited to introduce to you the impact performance benchmarks. This first benchmark that we launched just 2 weeks ago focuses on financial inclusion. And the benchmark itself is an analytic tool that offers impact information across specific sectors. And in this case, we focus on financial services, really to help investors understand impact performance in a way that's comparable among peers so that you can look at your own performance relative to the market, but also in a way that's comparable to the Sustainable Development Goals to really understand whether we're making progress relative to the challenges that we're looking to tackle. The benchmark can be used for a whole variety of purposes. And for the industry, it's especially important to help encourage and sort of push towards transparency and to drive investors towards focusing on results, on that actual impact performance. And then for investors, this offers a lot of opportunity to help shape and drive decisions across these 3 main categories: portfolio construction. And so really thinking about investment strategy and decisions around allocating capital in a way that takes impact into account. Portfolio management, and so when it comes to setting impact targets and engaging with portfolio companies and helping to guide your investments toward greater impact and sort of identify areas of outperformance relative to peers and toward social and environmental thresholds, and also identifying areas of underperformance and opportunities to deepen that impact. And then finally, this type of impact insight can be used in all types of communications and disclosures. So for things like fundraising and impact reporting and sharing impact information with LPs and stakeholders and potentially others in the industry. And we really do realize that this is especially critical now as we see changes in our regulatory environment when it comes to impact performance reporting. And so the benchmark itself forms part of the IRIS Plus system, which, as many of you know, is a system for measuring, managing, and optimizing impact. And it very much builds from the impact frameworks that sit within the IRIS Plus system, using those core metric sets as the foundation for the key performance indicators that you'll see in the benchmark in just a moment. And then, of course, the list, which is a directory of investors that allows users to discover and be discovered and learn about impact investing activity and the practices of others in the industry. And then thirdly, we've got the analytics, which offer the tools for users to understand market activity and trends and impact performance. And so this impact performance benchmark in financial inclusion is that first analytic tool that we've launched, and it forms part of this analytics function. And so perhaps with that, we'll go ahead and shift on over to the demo and really give you a chance to see the benchmark itself. And so hopefully folks can see my screen here. And what we're looking at right now is the IRIS Plus system homepage. And so you'll find here the IRIS Plus directory, the frameworks, and analytics. And if we go ahead and click on the analytics section here, we'll be taken directly to the impact performance benchmark. The benchmark itself consists of direct investments made into financial services, with impact investments included from 2008 up until 2021. On the left-hand side here, you'll see that we've got a bit of a navigation pane with an overview of the funds and investments represented in the sample, an impact performance summary across those investments, and then a bit of a deep dive into the 7 key performance indicators that we explore within financial inclusion. I'll note that we co-developed this benchmark with a group of 13 leading asset managers that are making investments in financial inclusion, and works together from sort of a content perspective to shape the impact indicators and the product features, and also from an investor usability perspective to ensure that we're building a tool that is genuinely useful for investor decision making. And I know that we've got a handful of folks that were part of the benchmark design team on the line today, and a huge thank you from all of us really for your role in building this. And so as you'll see here on this summary sort of overview page, we've got 69 funds represented with over 500 investments. And so that's the number of unique investments. But in the benchmark, we also look at impact results in annual increments, which really allows us to look at how impact is evolving over time as well. And if we click here on this funds tab, we have a little bit of detail on the sustainable development goals that the funds target, where they are headquartered geographically, and then also a little bit of insight on the investments themselves that are represented, included where they are located geographically, the different types of financial services providers. And we can see here that the most common type is microfinance institutions, or MFIs, which isn't really all that surprising, just given how mature the microfinance sector is. Stage of business down here. And I'll note that these contextual elements are really critical, not only to understanding the diversity of investments in financial inclusion, but also to actually interpreting the impact results in a way that is meaningful and comparable. And so that's where the filters come into play. And up here, you'll see the option to apply filters. And we essentially offer the opportunity for users to disaggregate impact results and focus on a particular subset of the sample that's most relevant. We've got investment filters. So for example, the asset class of the investment and the time horizon. And then we've also got investee filters. So things like the geographic region of the investee, the stage of business, the type of financial service provider. And this really helps us get at those like-to-like comparisons, and also gives a user flexibility. And so you might choose to look at a broader, higher level set of impact results at the start of the investment process as you're sort of thinking through some of those strategic choices. But you could also narrow in on a particular asset class and geography when it comes down to managing the performance of a particular investment. And I'll shift us over now to the portfolio overview. And this section offers a summary of the impact performance across the 7 key performance indicators that are featured in the benchmark. And so each of these boxes represents a different key performance indicator and offers a little bit of insight into the distribution of impact, the average impact results, and the medians. I'll flag that the key performance indicators really build from the IRIS Plus core metric sets and Compass, the methodology for comparing and assessing impact. And these were also shaped by our benchmark design team, and we'll share a little bit more on that process in just a few minutes. And so if we take a look at this first key performance indicator as an example, we focus here on clients actively using responsible financial services. And so we get at both the quantitative, the number of clients that are active, and also that qualitative layer, so those accessing responsible financial services with some sort of client protection mechanism in place. And you can see a little bit of detail on how we're approaching the KPIs and also some of the longer term outcomes up here, which is based on the evidence base that is available in IRIS+. The other piece you'll notice is that we've got 3 different impact figures that we reflect out in the benchmark itself. And the reality is that there are different angles to understanding impact performance. And so this first figure is company impact, and that's the number of clients actively using responsible financial services at the investee organization. We've got investment impact, and so that's the investment weighted number of clients, which is calculated using the investment stake, really to understand the impact associated with a given tranche of capital. And then thirdly, over here, we've got the year-on-year change. And really, this is what impact is all about, that change from year to year. And then you'll see up here, we've also got the distribution chart that reflects that year-on-year change across each annualized investment. And then we offer the opportunity to do a little bit of a deep dive into each KPI, where you'll find just a little bit more detail and information on the key performance indicators. And so I'll point out a couple of the neat features, but certainly encourage you to dig in further on your own. At the bottom here, we've got a bit of a percentile table where we offer a comparison to the Sustainable Development Goal target. And this offers an opportunity for comparison and to use the SDGs as a tool to actually manage impact. And so to do this, we've identified the relevant Sustainable Development Goal indicator for each KPI to really make that comparison and to make it meaningful. In this example, we are looking at clients actively using financial services, which links most closely to SDG 1.4. Ensuring all individuals have access to basic services, including financial services by 2030. And so from there, we've assessed the data and identified the gap and the change that's needed to address it. And so in this case, what we see is that there are about 1.7 billion people globally that are lacking access to responsible financial services. And then in order to close that gap, and provide everyone an access in line with the global goal, we would need to increase the number of clients by 4.1% each year. So that's the pace of change. These SDG comparisons are, of course, really helpful context in terms of just emphasizing the scale of the challenge and really the opportunity for impact investors to lean into that and contribute to addressing the gap. But it also offers context for performance. And we can see here that some investments might be outperforming relative to that global goal, and others might be underperforming. And there's certainly opportunity to do more to reach that global goal. And then the other piece I'll point to quickly is this tab over here that looks at performance over time. And this is available across each of the KPIs, and we'll take a look at just this one example. But essentially, it helps us to understand how impact is accruing and changing over time, looking at the holding period for an investment and the associated impact results. And so we can start to unpack how investment time horizon might play a role in influencing impact results, like this one. There are all sorts of other neat features available in the benchmark. You'll see here on the right-hand side, the IRIS metrics that are used to sort of underlie or help build the key performance indicators. We also offer a little bit of insight into the share of the benchmark sample that reported on each KPI, or in other words, the coverage, recognizing, of course, that not all indicators are necessarily relevant across all investment strategies. And then also a little bit of insight down here on data quality. And this is sort of a self-reported assessment of the data quality that has been submitted across each investment. And so And the final thing I'll point out actually is just down here, the opportunity, of course, to submit your own data and of course provide feedback. But what we've shared here so far is those aggregate benchmark figures. But of course, the value comes in when you get to see your own organization's performance relative to that benchmark. And so for those organizations that have contributed data, they will have that additional layer of tailored analytics to really be able to compare their own performance to some of these aggregate figures. And so I'll shift us over to the demo account just to see an example of what that might look like. And you see here that same portfolio overview, but with the additional layer showing your average across your own portfolio of investments. And so here you can see whether you are outperforming or underperforming relative to the benchmark, and start to explore opportunities for managing your impact performance based on this type of insight. And these insights are of course available across the full benchmark. And so as a contributor to the benchmark, you would get access to those same types of tailored insights across each KPI deep dive as well. Of course, the tailored analytics, so that additional layer, is only available to you and your organization. It is not made public, but it allows you to compare to the aggregate and to ensure that you are represented in the benchmark itself. And so that is a quick overview. There's a lot more rich detail, and we encourage you to take a look on your own, and we'll be sharing the links to access. But at this stage, I will pass back over to Ben, who will be introducing our two speakers on the line who helped design and really create the benchmark. So back over to you, Ben.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Sophia, and hi again, everyone. I'm pleased to chat with you all today about how this benchmark was built, and specifically about the role played by our benchmark design team. The benchmark design team was a group of 13 investors that co-developed this benchmark alongside the GIIN, both by providing impact data for analysis and by providing thought leadership on many, many elements of the benchmark. Our benchmark design team members were true partners in the process of building this benchmark, and we're thrilled to welcome two of them to discuss their experiences as a part of that benchmark design team with all of you. Ami Patel is a partner at Elevar Equity, and Anna Kanze is a managing director at Grassroots Capital Management. Through their participation in the benchmark design team, Ami and Anna have helped spearhead this effort and helped to build the benchmark into the product that you all just saw in Sophia's demo. Ami and Anna, we're so glad to have you with us. Thanks for joining us today. So to start out, it would really just be great if both of you could briefly introduce yourselves and give an overview of your respective organizations. So maybe, Ami, we could start with you.
Sure. Hi, everybody. It's great to be here. Thank you so much for taking on this very large endeavor and corralling all of us to this point. I'm with Elevar Equity. Elevar is a early stage and equity investor. We focus on underserved and low-income communities in India and Latin America and look to build distribution models that deliver essential products and services. We've been doing this for 15 years. And so being a part of this endeavor was something that helped us think about things in a slightly different, more advanced way than the way that we've organically built our strategy.
Thank you. And Anna, over to you.
Great. Thanks, everyone. I'm happy to be here with a lot of like-minded people that are working on this as well. So at Grassroots, we work with regional impact fund managers who manage funds that invest in financial inclusion, affordable housing, affordable education, and sustainable agriculture. We have also been doing this, for quite some time, I guess, since, before I started in 2008, so back in, I guess, 2004, and so have, participated in various industry efforts as they developed, but a lot of them weren't around when we first started, and so we, went from our own proprietary sort of solutions to contributing to industry level benchmarks and standards. And so happy to see the work that's been done on this very much needed impact benchmark. And yeah, looking forward to the discussion.
Wonderful. Wonderful. Well, for the next question, I think this really ties in nicely. Knowing a little bit about both of your organizations now, it would be great to hear why you both chose to participate in the benchmark design team. What were the real motivating factors there? And Anna, we could start with you this time.
Okay. So, I mean, like I said, we're kind of intermediaries, and we initially, I mean, since I started in 2008, we were making the funds that we were supporting were making investments in microfinance institutions, and then as those institutions kind of adapted and transformed themselves, and then also as we expanded to other sectors, we, looked to find appropriate metrics that could, help us, and then also had a business reason for the portfolio companies themselves, because without that, it's really difficult to collect data if there's no business case on the part of those that are directly involved in the collection of the data. So when I started, there weren't a lot of industry level standards or agreed upon metrics. I think even, number of women served was a revolutionary sort of data point to collect, which is kind of crazy thinking about it now. But so, we worked with networks like the Social Performance Task Force and like GIIN to create, agreed upon sort of languages for this data collection. And, like I said, I just see that we see this benchmark as kind of an evolution of those efforts, and something that's much needed in the industry, because, I think it's everybody on this call. If you're saying you're a socially responsible investor or an impact investor, you need to actually be at least trying to collect data to prove that point. So yeah, that's sort of why we joined. We've kind of been involved, I guess, since early days, and we just really see a need in this industry. And also I would add that as relatively smaller portfolio managers, we don't really, there's a lot of value in an industry level benchmark rather than a benchmark kind of with our own portfolio companies. As maybe larger managers can do that, but we see the value more at an industry level where there's more data and more segmentation.
I would echo a lot of what Anna was saying. I think what I would add is that for us at Elevar, we have our own impact measurement framework that is designed and specific to the types of investments we make. But on the flip side, we keep getting requests from LPs, and there's the need in the industry to create some sort of commonality in measurement and reporting. So there was a significant amount of motivation to help the GIIN advance the industry and create, at least within one sector that is pretty core when you think about impact investing in the social side of our engagement. Financial services is always going to be a driving force for a lot of capital allocation. And so our motivation was to help the industry, help GIIN be a leader in shaping this framework and creating some commonality, but then also figuring out how do we advance our own internal thinking to move beyond just what we do as our own impact framework, but contribute towards a broader framework. And I think some of the questions that you may have later, Ben, can get into where we face some challenges and where we have some disagreements with the way the industry is going. But I mean, to the end, I mean, for us, if we could get to a magical world where all of our LPs are asking us the exact same question and asking for one report, I think that's a win for the industry. We're very far from that, but I think this is a really good step in getting us closer.
Sure. No, that makes a lot of sense to me. And I'd like to follow up with a question. I know that you noted that that you have your own internal impact measurement framework. I'd be really interested in hearing some specific examples. I know that you said working a lot with your LPs and trying to come around commonality in the industry were some motivators for joining this design team. But could you give a few concrete examples of ways that you intend to use the benchmark specifically in the context of your work? And maybe a few of the features or functionalities that you think are best equipped to help there.
Sure. So we have our own way of doing everything. That's just who we are at Elevar. I think one of the things that what I'm excited to look at is how do we compare and contrast to the industry, and why is there a delta? Is it that we're not collecting the data correctly, or that we're not getting to the depth that others are starting to look at? And so we need to rethink how we're measuring the depth of our impact and showcasing that to the outside world. I also think we do collect a lot of data, but it's not part of our core impact framework, because that's a framework that is really only focused on 3 critical KPIs. So then how do we build robust systems in-house to ensure we're collecting data in a way that's beneficial to the industry, but also helps to articulate that depth, which I think is where the industry is going. Is you can have outputs, but as we try to get to closer to that outcome argument, this analysis helps us to sort of see where we're heading and how we're contributing to overarching goals. I think the other component that I'm hoping to see out of this is everyone that's claiming to be impactful or doing impact. This is a way for us to set some of us that have been in the industry for a long time and actually have a robust way of thinking about this. This still keeps everyone accountable to what they are claiming and what they are reporting and how they're measuring that. And there's some sort of oversight on that process.
Sure. Thank you. And as you can guess, that aligns with our vision for the product as well. Anna, I'd like to turn it over to you and also hear, if you see similar use cases to the ones Emmy just outlined, and specifically if there are any functions within the tool that you are particularly excited about using.
Yeah, I mean, I echo everything Emmy has said. We are still, as intermediaries, we're getting a lot of ad hoc and bespoke requests from our investors and asset owners in general. And we've started to, try to integrate the benchmark into our reporting to them in the hopes of getting them to adopt these metrics as, the ones that they find to be key. I doubt, like Emmy said, we'll ever really get to just one set of metrics that everybody agrees on, unfortunately, but, it's going to keep trying and hopefully, reduce the reporting burden a little bit. So I think the filters are also really useful since, some asset owners are only interested in certain things, for example, certain regions. And then also I would say the peer analysis is also very useful. Like Emmy said, just comparing to other funds that are out there, even as average basis, not specifically calling out one fund over another, but just seeing where the fund managers that we work with lie. And also for our partners that are maybe fundraising, that peer analysis is also useful for them too.
Great. Well, we only have time for 1 or 2 more questions, and I'm going to ask that you keep your responses for these to just 60 seconds to make sure that we have enough time. But I'd be really interested in hearing, and I think our audience would be interested in hearing as well, was any part of this effort surprising or challenging based on your expectations going in?
Well, I'll be really quick. I think what is challenging but not surprising, just because we've been tackling this, is creating a common definition and a way of measuring that is consistent across everybody. And that took a lot of iteration and debate to come to the sort of the framework that GIIN is using. So I think that's probably the biggest one from my perspective, was getting everybody to make sure that we are around a very clear and concise definition for each of the metrics so that there's no ambiguity on how you measure it.
Yeah, I agree with that too. You know, a lot of the definitions we thought we had nailed down, and then when you actually go to report it, there's a lot of still some different ways to interpret it. I would also add, the funds that we're working with are winding down, many of them, and so that those we were using historical data, and so it just sort of, maybe I'll switch to surprising versus challenging, just how far we've come as an industry, and you know, what we weren't collecting in the beginning, and how difficult it is to get these data when you haven't been collecting them in the beginning. So it's definitely helped in terms of setting up, you know, how to go forward and how to think of structuring agreements, both with the portfolio companies and then maybe with the asset owners on the other end.
Sure. Wonderful. Well, Ami and Anna, thank you so much for your time today. We're so lucky that these two participants will be staying on the line with us. So if you have any questions that you'd like to ask them, please again send them to our questions lead in the chat, and we'll try to get to them in the Q&A portion at the end of this webinar. So Ami, Anna, thank you both once again. But before we get to the Q&A, we'd like to provide a little bit more detail on the overall benchmark design process and on where the GIIN is looking to go from here. So as I previously mentioned, the GIIN co-developed this benchmark alongside a benchmark design team consisting of 13 investors, 2 of which you just heard from, in financial inclusion. Each of the design team participants were either members of the GIIN, either at the network or membership level. They also all had robust impact measurement and management practices in place and had significant allocations in direct investments to the financial inclusion sector. The role of the benchmark design team was twofold. First, we relied on the design team members to contribute IRIS Plus and Compass aligned data that could be used to build out the analytic portion of the benchmarks. And second, we relied on the design team members to lend their sector expertise and thought partnership in order to do things like develop the key performance indicators and the underlying metrics that you saw in the final benchmark, and also to iterate on early prototypes and help design the benchmark into the product that you saw in its final form. Ultimately, we relied on the design team members as investors themselves to ensure that this product would be relevant and actionable for their own organizations and for other investors in the financial inclusion space. And lastly, now that this benchmark has launched, these investors serve as ambassadors and champions for the project and are helping illuminate use cases for other investors. So we wanted to take a quick moment to thank our 13 design team members. We know that many of you are on the line right now. So once again, thank you so much. Your efforts have really been instrumental, and we know that this benchmark would not have been possible without your cooperation. So to those of you on the line and those who aren't, thank you so much, really sincerely from us at the GIIN. So this design team was intentionally created to be a diverse group in order to represent the full, varied range of investment opportunities in financial inclusion. As you can see here, there's a large geographic spread, both in terms of investors and also investee organizations. And there's also a wide spread of different organization types and different sized organizations. This was a very intentional choice in creating this team, and we think that this makeup really was one of the greatest strengths of our benchmark design team. So as I mentioned, the benchmark design team assisted the GIIN in determining which key performance indicators to include in this benchmarking effort. The GIIN also relied on existing frameworks such as SBTF and others for guidance. We utilized the IRIS Plus core metric sets and evidence base to guide our metric selection as we designed the key performance indicators. We implemented our Compass methodology for comparing and assessing impact to ensure that all data was indeed normalized and comparable. And lastly, we aligned our key performance indicators to specific sustainable development goals. As you saw during Sophia's benchmark demo, this allowed us to compare both investor and market performance to the pace of change needed to achieve the SDGs. I want to reiterate that this is a really, really critical part of the benchmark. We're not only leveraging the SDGs as a communications tool, but rather as a practical impact management tool. This allows the benchmark to show whether or not impact achieved is really making a difference, or if it's moving the needle in a meaningful way. So the key performance indicators that we landed on for this study are listed here, and they're grouped into two broad buckets. The first is financial opportunity and resilience, and the second is inclusive economic development. In developing this benchmark alongside the design team, we captured impact data on 2,066 annualized impact investments. This means that our benchmark sample is in fact the largest cross-fund, cross-organization impact performance dataset in the world. We are really thrilled with the amount of data that we've been able to collect, and we're also excited to continue adding to this sample set as we expand the benchmark. So now that the product is launched, what's next for the GIIN and for our benchmarking efforts? Well, like I just mentioned, we're continuing to grow and expand our benchmarking work, with the ultimate goal being for investors to be able to compare all of their investments on the basis of impact, and for all investors to consider the social and environmental effects of their entire investment portfolios. We're currently expanding our financial inclusion benchmark, and we're seeking new submissions to include in the sample set. You saw during Sophia's demo where on the benchmark website that can be found. We are also accepting applications through the end of April from organizations who are interested in sitting on the benchmark design team for our next planned benchmark, which will be in agriculture. So you just heard from two members of the benchmark design team for financial inclusion. If the work that they did sounds interesting to you, if you think that you would have data to contribute and expertise, thought partnership to contribute to our agriculture benchmarking effort, we'll drop the link to the application survey in our chat now, and we'll ask that you please apply if you're interested. And then finally, our overall vision is to expand this benchmarking effort to cover all impact themes present in IRIS+. Now that'll take a little bit of time, but we're getting there. And as I just mentioned, our next planned theme will be in agriculture. And after that, we'll be following it up with energy. So there are a few key ways that you can get involved. First, we'll ask that you claim your organization's profile on the IRIS+ list. And once you do so, please complete information on your organization's activity and practice. We also encourage you to make your profile public, as much information as you feel comfortable with, to both demonstrate your transparency and to earn different achievement levels on the IRIS+ list badge. You can also, again, like we just did, you can access the first impact performance benchmark in financial inclusion. That can be done through the IRIS+ system, and we would welcome you to submit data to this effort if you have impact data that might be relevant. Our emails will be up on the next slide, so if you have any questions about the submission, please reach out. We'll be happy to chat. And then finally, we'd like to invite you all to apply to join the agriculture benchmark design team. Again, the link to do so is in the chat right now, and you could also reach out to us at our emails if you'd like to hear more information on that. And also, come July, you'll be able to submit your impact performance data directly via the IRIS+ list. So once that functionality is live, we'll ask that it would be really helpful if you set up your IRIS+ list profile now, so that when that time comes, you are ready to submit it all in that place. And with that, I would really like to extend a sincere thank you to all of you on the line. Really, this is such an exciting moment, not just for the GIIN, but for the industry. And we really hope that you all feel ownership over this benchmark too, and that we can bring it forward together in order to move the impact space forward. So with that, again, if you have any questions, please feel free to reach out to us. Our emails are up here. And with that, I'll transition us to a Q&A. So again, this is one last call that if you have any questions, please direct them to our questions lead in the chat. And Sophia, our first question is for you. And one of our audience members would like to hear a little bit more about how the benchmark accounts for different types of context.
Yeah, it's a great question. And I think one of our favorite ones to answer, in part because we've been doing a lot of thinking around how to make impact result comparisons that are genuinely meaningful. And so we incorporate context into the benchmark itself in a couple of different ways. And the first is through the filters that we offer. And these are available for investment and also investee level sort of contextual variables or features. And so what we've done is collected data for each investment that was submitted on some of those contextual variables to then allow users and investors like you to filter or segment the impact results based on those variables. On the investment side, some of the examples include asset class, so being able to filter data by private debt versus private equity, as well as the investment time horizon. And then on the investee side, we look at different types of investee features. And so things like the type of financial service provider, the geographic region of the investee and where it's based, the stage of business of the investee. And what we recognize is that all of these elements are just really, really crucial as we think about how to actually interpret some of those key performance indicators that you saw earlier. The other quick thing that I'll maybe point to is that second element in terms of context, and that's being able to look at investment impact. And as you may have caught in the demo, we showcase different angles of impact performance. One piece of that is company or investee impact. And the second piece is investment impact. And so that allows us to take into account the outstanding investment amount relative to the enterprise value of the investee in order to look at the impact associated with a given tranche of capital. And in that sense, that really does allow us to compare not only impact results at the company level, but also investment level impact results. So hopefully that answers your question, but maybe finally, I'll suggest that you also take a look at Compass. A lot of the analytic methodology that the benchmark is based on is actually outlined in our methodology for comparing and assessing impact in Compass. And so we can circulate a link to that as well, and certainly encourage you to take a look.
Wonderful. Well, thank you so much, Sophia. Our next question is for our two speakers, Ami and Anna. So how did you go about socializing this idea within your organization, the idea to be a part of this benchmark design team? And was there any difficulty in terms of getting internal buy-in to support an initiative like this? Maybe Anna, we'll start with you.
So I think the buy-in was definitely there because we definitely believe in, like I said, measuring or at least attempting to measure our non-financial performance. I would say there was a little bit of reluctance in, reporting again to a new type of thing. But a lot of these data were already being collected, through the SPI4 or some of the other tools that our portfolio companies were doing. And so it was more just getting it together and aggregating it and putting it in one place. So, but as far as, the general idea of doing this, we're all on board. So, yeah.
I would echo, everyone's on board. It's just a matter of organizing the back end to meet the requirements of the layers of information the database is asking for. And I think, again, goal, the big goal is commonality. And I encourage GIIN to keep pushing with OI and the investment principles, and just sort of that sort of endeavor at the LP side. So as much as the GPs are coming together, I think for us, convincing the internal audience that if we lead and contribute alongside like-minded GPs, then we can also lead by example for our LPs to also be more productive in working together.
Right. Thank you both. Sophia, I'm going to go back to you for this next question. And one of our audience members would like to know if any data provided by individual fund managers is public, and how impact data confidentiality will be protected if needed.
Yeah, it's a really important question. And so all data that's contributed to the impact performance benchmarks does remain confidential, and folks can find more information about the terms of confidentiality and data privacy on the Iris Plus system and in the data intake tool itself. In terms of the information that's reflected out and those aggregate figures, all of the impact insights are reflected out in aggregate and are anonymized. Of course, for those that contribute data, you do get access to that additional layer of tailored insights. And so you do get to see your own impact information as compared to the aggregate benchmark. But that additional layer, the tailored insights, are only available to you. So it is not made publicly available.
Great. Thank you, Sophia. I'm going to stick with you for this next question. It's somewhat related. Are the data in the benchmarks validated in any way?
Yeah, and so the way that we've approached the research for the benchmarking is much like a lot of the research that we've conducted at the GIIN in the past, where we have collected self-reported data from investors. And on our end, we have gone through a data cleaning and clarification process. And so speaking to the contributors and the investors to make sure that we're appropriately understanding the impact results in the data that has been contributed. And from there, we're reflecting the information out. And so there is not any sort of third-party verification that's being conducted, and it is self-reported data.
Great, and Ami and Anna, I'll turn this one over to you as well, because the person who asked this question is also interested in hearing how both of you at your organizations, if you validate your impact data, and if there are any third parties that you work with or anything that validate whether or not you have met your SDG criteria. So maybe Ami, we'll start with you for this one.
We just went through the process to validate our process, but we are not, we have not validated our data. What we intend to do is explore with our auditors to validate our data through our audit engagement, because most of our KPIs that look to measure impact are also financial KPIs. So we're trying to see if it can become an embedded holistic process where we're auditing both the financials and the impact at the same time by the same entity.
We also, the data are really self-reported. We do checks on the data, especially if something looks completely out of line or, is inconsistent, or we know it isn't true, but we don't validate or pay for the data to be validated. Some of the portfolio companies do have their own engage in ratings and social performance ratings and more in-depth impact assessments. So that's another way, that the data can be validated, but that is one of an area that, could be improved. And I see in the chat that there are third parties that do that, so. Great.
Well, thank you both for those answers. And I think we have one last question, which I'll direct over to Sophia. One of our audience members is interested in hearing if there are any benchmark values that speak to the long-term outcomes that end clients are experiencing. So for example, there's a lot of operational data on something like client income, and wondering if we're able to tie this to maybe increased outcome lifting out of poverty or something else along those lines.
Yeah, it's such a fantastic question. And so we've done a lot of deep thinking on the back end in terms of how some of the outputs really connect to outcomes data. In reality, what we see in the field and hear from investors is that collecting outcomes data directly is incredibly challenging. But what we also can rely on is a handful of quantitative and qualitative data points that help us get to some of those outcomes. And so in order to do this in the benchmark, we very much relied on the foundation that Iris Plus has built and provided in terms of looking at some of those outcome indicators that we see in the system, as well as the evidence base that helps point to some of the longer term outcomes. And the other piece that I'll mention is that for each of the key performance indicators that are featured in the benchmark, what you'll see is that there's a quantitative layer, but also a qualitative element to it to help get to some of those medium-term outcomes. And so thinking about the example that we walked through together, clients actively using financial services, we've layered on that qualitative element, the responsible financial services. Another example is looking at jobs supported and thinking about those jobs that are decent jobs as per a set of policies that we've outlined in the benchmark, and those that are at or above a living wage. But what we have done is a little bit of a mapping, and so you'll actually see some of that insight directly in the benchmark. If you hover your mouse over some of the question marks across each of the KPIs, so you can get some of the insight into the longer term outcomes. But thank you for the question. It's a great one.
Great. Well, thank you, Sophia. Thank you also to Ami and Anna for joining. Thanks to our benchmark design team members who are also on the line. And thank you to all of you for joining this. This has been a really, really interesting hour, and at least personally has made me so excited for the road that is ahead in terms of impact performance analytics and benchmarking. So again, we'll invite, if you have any questions, any thoughts or recommendations that you'd like to express, please feel free to reach out to us via the emails on this slide. And we really look forward to continuing this work together. So thank you all very much and have a great day.